So, what single piece of technology caused the execution of an Italian miller, permanently divided the Catholic Church, and actually fueled the fight for Indian independence? I know, right? It sounds exactly like the plot of some sweeping historical thriller. But no, this is the very real story of how information went viral, way, way before the internet. Welcome to this explainer. We usually think of reading as this quiet, solitary thing. But as we dive into the source material, it becomes pretty clear that the history of print, it's really the history of power. We're going to see how the real information age didn't actually kick off in Silicon Valley. Nope, it started centuries ago with carved blocks of wood. Okay, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the dawn of print, move right into Gutenberg's print revolution, and then explore religion, rebellion, and revolution. After that, we'll look at when print comes to India, highlight voices of the marginalized, and finally wrap up with censorship and resistance. Part 1, the dawn of print, from woodblocks to the Silk Road. Okay, so what completely flips our normal perspective here is that the earliest print technology wasn't some big machine. It was entirely hand-printed. Way back around 8594, the Chinese were already printing books by basically rubbing paper against inked wood blocks. And because that thin paper couldn't take ink on both sides, they came up with this really ingenious folded and stitched accordion book. Then, around 8078, Buddhist missionaries take this tech over to Japan, which leads to printing things like the famous Diamond Sutra. Fast forward a bit to 1295, and you have the explorer Marco Polo returning to Italy from China. He brings this woodblock knowledge back with him. From there, the idea slowly spreads across Europe, completely setting the stage for what would happen in the 1430s. Which brings us to part 2, Gutenberg's print revolution, the machine that changed everything. Now here is an absolutely crucial point. Johann Gutenberg didn't just invent the printing press out of thin air. Instead, he brilliantly mashed up existing technologies that he already knew. He took the mechanical force of an agricultural olive press, literally a press used for squeezing wine and oil, and he combined that with his own skills as a goldsmith and stone polisher. Then he used lead molds to cast movable metal type. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. By 1448, he had perfected this system. Suddenly, his press could crank out 250 sheets on one side per hour. Compared to carving entire woodblocks by hand, this was an absolute game changer. 200 million. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this revolution, think about this. In the second half of the 15th century, all of Europe produced about 20 million printed books. But by the 16th century, that number absolutely exploded to a staggering 200 million copies. I mean, we are talking about a massive, exponential leap in human communication. But listen, this was so much more than just a technical upgrade to print books faster. The print revolution fundamentally rewired human relationships with information, with knowledge, and most importantly, with authority. It essentially created this massive, brand new reading public. Because before print, reading was strictly for the elite, right? Ordinary people lived in this oral culture, folk tales, spoken ballads, that kind of thing. Print totally blurred those lines. Publishers actually started printing heavily illustrated ballads specifically so they could be read out loud in village taverns. The written and the spoken worlds just collided. Moving to part 3, religion, rebellion, and revolution, the power of dangerous ideas. We can actually trace a very direct chain of cause and effect here. So, in 1517, Martin Luther writes his 95 Theses criticizing the Roman Catholic Church. Because of the printing press, his writings are rapidly reproduced and spread everywhere. Suddenly, you have ordinary people forming their own individual interpretations of faith. This intense debate permanently divides Christianity and kicks off the Protestant Reformation. And hey, remember that Italian miller from the beginning, Menacchio? Well, he read the printed books that were suddenly available, decided to reinterpret the Bible for himself, and was literally executed by the Inquisition for it. Print was quite literally a matter of life and death. Fast forward a bit and we hit another massive shockwave. By the 17th and 18th centuries, literacy rates in parts of Europe hit upwards of 80%. The source material actually calls this a reading mania. The writings of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau, they spread like wildfire. And this created a whole new public culture of debate, where tradition, the church, and even despotic kings could be openly questioned. By the 1780s, you literally had cheap printed cartoons, ruthlessly mocking royalty. Print had absolutely ripened the conditions for the French Revolution. But, and this is a really vital nuance from the source material, it's not like print just magically brainwashed people. After all, people were still reading church propaganda and pro-monarchy texts, too. Print culture was an enabling condition for debate. It didn't just mechanically produce a revolution all by itself. What it did do was open up incredible new possibilities for challenging the existing order. It gave people the tools to think differently. Part 4. Print comes to India, from manuscripts to mass media. Now, when we compare Europe and India, this fascinating global pattern starts to emerge. Long before the press ever arrived in Goa with Portuguese missionaries in the mid-16th century, India already had this incredibly rich, beautiful tradition of handwritten palm leaf manuscripts. We're talking Sanskrit, Arabic, Persian, various vernacular languages. But just like in Europe, those manuscripts were super fragile and really expensive. So when mass print finally took hold in India, it triggered the exact same ripple effect we saw in Europe. It democratized religion and forced intense public debate. Hindu and Muslim reformers, alongside Orthodox groups, all started using these cheap lithographic presses to basically battle it out in the court of public opinion. Part 5. Voices of the Marginalized, Democratizing the Written Word. Take the absolutely incredible story of Rosh Sundari Devi. You have to understand, this was a time when conservative Hindus actually believed that literacy would make girls widows, and some Muslims feared that Urdu romances would corrupt women. Despite all that, she secretly taught herself to read-write inside her Orthodox household. And then in 1876, she published Amar Juban, which was the very first full-length autobiography in the Bengali language. Just think about that. Print gave women a way to publicly express their lived experiences, their confinement, and their fierce intellect despite massive conservative anxiety. And print also became a primary weapon against caste discrimination. In 1871, the visionary reformer Jyotiba Phule published Ghulam Giri, using the written word to forcefully expose the harsh injustices of the caste system. Later on, leaders like B.R. Ambedkar wrote these powerful critiques of caste, and the writings circulated far and wide. Even mill workers in Kanpur started publishing their own poems and setting up libraries to educate themselves, literally linking the struggles of caste and class exploitation. The printed word was rapidly becoming a powerful tool for liberation. Which leads us to Part 6, Censorship and Resistance, the Battle for the Press. Unsurprisingly, the colonial government in India grew increasingly terrified of these vernacular, nationalist newspapers. After the 1857 revolt, their attitudes hardened sharply, and this culminated in the notorious Vernacular Press Act of 1878. This act gave the government sweeping powers to censor reports and even confiscate printing machinery if their warnings were ignored. Leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak were literally imprisoned for their writings. But here is the most fascinating part. This suppression completely backfired. It only fueled nationalist resistance even more. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi famously linked the liberty of the press in free speech directly to the struggle for Swaraj, or self-rule. Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis of everything we've explored in this explainer. Print culture equals technology, plus readers, plus ideas, plus debate, which ultimately equals power. The print revolution was never just about a machine stamping ink onto some paper. It was about readers interacting with bold new ideas, sparking fierce debates, and ultimately claiming political and social power from the elites who used to hold it all. So, I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought. We've seen how simple woodblocks and metal presses dismantled absolute monarchies, fractured ancient religious institutions, and fueled anti-colonial revolutions. If simple ink and paper possess the power to completely upend the world, what established authorities do you think today's digital information revolution will ultimately dismantle? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning and keep learning.